Promises. Yes, ever since I started this JavaScript interview series, I've received a massive request for a video on this topic. So in today's video, we will discuss callbacks, callback hell, promises, promise chaining, promise combinators, async await, and much more along with their interview questions from basics to advanced. And the best part is that we will go on to create our own promise implementation. Yes, we will create the polyfills for promise and its combinators like Promise.all, Promise.race, Promise.all.settled, and Promise.any. So over here I've opened basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. So let's understand what a promise is. So let's take an example over here of a child and his mother. So let's say the mother asks the child to clean his room. And according to that, he will get to go to play with his friends or he will get the punishment. So over here, the child makes a promise with his mother that, okay, I will clean the room. So a promise has been established over here. And if he fulfills the promise, then his mother will let him go to play with his friends. And if he doesn't fulfill the promise, he will get another punishment. So this is exactly how promises work in JavaScript as well. So let's say if we are trying to fetch the data from an API, we ask for the data from our front end and the API promises us to return some data. If we get the data, if the promise is fulfilled, we can use this data and display it to our user. But if it doesn't get the data, if it rejects our promise, then we are going to display some error. So we're gonna go and deep dive into what promises are very soon, but let's start from the absolute scratch. So let's discuss the difference between synchronous and asynchronous code, because promises is an asynchronous code, right? So you should know the difference between what a synchronous code is and an asynchronous code is, just in case if your interviewer asks you this question as well. Let's take a basic example of synchronous code. So I'm gonna console log start, finish, and in between these, I'm gonna put another console log, which will say subscribe to Roadside Coder, which you should if you haven't yet. So if I run this file, so let me run this HTML file real quick. So here it is, and I'm gonna go to inspect console, and yep, you can see this is start, subscribe to Roadside Coder, and finish. So what's happening over here is our code is being executed line by line. So this is an example of a synchronous code. But what about asynchronous code? So let's see an example of that as well. So instead of this, what I'm gonna write over here is, I'm gonna say set timeout, and let's give it, I don't know, 1 second. So if you don't know if a code is inside of a set timeout, it will execute the code after this amount of seconds. So for example, I've given here 1000 milliseconds, that means 1 second. So if we execute this, you're gonna notice, refresh this, we get start, we get finish, and then we get subscribe to Roadside Coder. So why did this happen? It's because JavaScript is a single threaded language and it cannot execute this set timeout in parallel as our code is being executed. So what it does is it's gonna execute all of our synchronous code and then it's gonna go on and execute this set timeout. Because set timeout is a part of our web APIs. So what happens is when it encounters this set timeout, even if we give 0 seconds over here, it's not gonna run it until our code has finished executing. So actually this is a complete different concept, which is of event loop. If you would like for me to make a separate video on event loop, just let me know in the comments down below, but I'm gonna briefly explain you over here what it does. So basically what we're trying to do over here is we're using set timeout to simulate an asynchronous process. So let's say if we were to fetch an API over here, that will also be an asynchronous operation, right? Because let's say if you're trying to fetch to-dos in your to-do application, which comes from the backend, right? So it's gonna execute all of the synchronous code, and meanwhile it's fetching that API, it's gonna run all of the code, and as soon as this code has finished executing, it's gonna run whatever code that is written inside of this set timeout. So this is basically an example of an asynchronous code. Don't worry, you're gonna get a better understanding of how this asynchronous code works as we move along in this video. But you have to remember this golden rule. JavaScript executes synchronous code first and then asynchronous code. So let's move forward and take a better example for this. So if I take this example right over here, so we have a start, we have a stop over here, and then we have this function called important action, which takes a username, and inside of this we have this set timeout, which just returns subscribe to whatever the username is. And over here we are calling this function and we are returning whatever we get from this function inside this message variable. So actually I'm gonna write right. So and then we are console logging this. So what do you think is going to be the output for this? So let's see, we are first going to print this start. Okay, then we're gonna encounter this function. Okay, fine. Then we will call this function over here. Cool, but remember, this function is acting as an asynchronous function since we have this set timeout inside of it, right? So this won't return anything instantly to this message variable, and this message variable will be undefined at this point. So this will print undefined, and then we will get stop. So let's see. Yep, you see, start, undefined, stop. So yeah, this is also one of the examples of an asynchronous code. So what do you think? How are we gonna run this code so that we get a message inside this console.log? So we're gonna use a concept called callbacks in JavaScript. So what we're gonna simply do is we're gonna take this console log. So basically when we pass a function inside of another function argument, so then we call that as a callback. So for example over here, so I'm gonna take a normal function over here. Let's say, it doesn't matter if it's a normal function or an arrow function, it's gonna work both ways. You see, we are passing a function inside of this function call as an argument, and inside this we can just say console.log message, and we're going to take a message over here, and then we're going to simply console log it over here, right? So we're going to receive callback over here, and when we return this, instead of returning this, what I'm going to simply do is I'm going to say callback and send this as an argument to this callback. So what it's going to do is it's going to call this callback over here, it's going to send the message, and then it's going to console log it right over here. Let's see, let's refresh this. So start, stop, and subscribe to Roadside Code. And now if you notice, this is coming at the very last because this is an asynchronous code. During that time, the console log was not inside of an asynchronous code, right? So that's why it was printing undefined instantly. But now that it's this operation will be completed after 1 second, after set timeout will be executed, only after that this function will be executed. Also, I told you that it doesn't matter if we have 0 over here as well, this will still be executed after our complete code is finished. So if you see, start, stop, and subscribe to Roadside Coder. Yep. Okay, so let's take this one step forward, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take another function over here called like the video, which takes the name of a video and returns like the whatever video it is. So what we want to do is we're going to execute this like the video function after this important action has finished executing. So it's simple actually. What we can do is we can simply below this call this function, and let's provide it. So what this should do is this should execute this, and then after this should execute like the video, and we want to console log it. So I'm going to pass another callback over here. Let's pass an arrow function this time. So log, put it inside of it, pass the callback over here like that, like this. So now if we go on to run this, you're going to see that we get start, stop, subscribe, and then like the JavaScript interview questions video, which you should like right now. And so what we're basically doing over here is, what we're trying to do over here is we want to execute this function after this function has finished executing, right? But if we were supposed to execute this function after it, then this would have depended on when we get the result. If we got the result of this first, then this will be executed. If we got the result of this first, then this will be executed. Let me remove this part, we don't need it anymore. Yeah, so let's say if this has, I don't know, 500 milliseconds and this has 1000 milliseconds. So this will be executed first. See, like that. So that is what we're trying to achieve over here, and callbacks helps us achieve just that. So let's have another function over here called share the video, and we're gonna just, I'm gonna take this and paste it over here and just say share the video. And what this will do is this will execute like the video when this has finished executing, and this will execute share the video when this has finished executing. So now if we see, we have first subscribe to Roadside Coder, then like the video, and then share the video. So that is exactly what we were trying to achieve over here. But did you notice something? That this nesting of these callback functions has made our code a little bit messy. So if we were to, let's say if we had more such callback functions, right? Because obviously when we're working in a company or a production code, our code won't look this simple, right? It will have more nested functions inside of it, like this. So you see, this is a weird looking code structure. It's forming a pyramid-like structure, which is also sometimes called as pyramid of doom. And this concept is called Callback Hell. It's because we're having so many nested callbacks one inside of the other that it's very hard to read and very hard to understand our code. So what do you think is the solution for this problem? Yes, you guessed it right, promises. So let's understand what promise is. So I'm going to remove this code. So promise basically represents the upcoming completion or a failure of an asynchronous event and its resulting value. So if you remember the example that I told you at the start of this video, the mother-child example, that the child promises his mother that yes, he's going to clean the room, and according to that, he will get the result or the value. So if he cleans the room, if he fulfills his promise, then he'll get to go to play with his friends. But if he doesn't fulfill his promise, if he rejects his promise, then he'll get the punishment. So this is how promise works in JavaScript as well. So let's understand over here. So I'm going to create a very simple promise example. So let's take const sub equals new promise. So we have this promise keyword in JavaScript, promise class in JavaScript, and we're going to create a new instance for this promise. So we're going to add this new keyword over here, new promise. And this promise takes a callback which has a resolve and reject keywords inside of it. Now inside of this, we can write our asynchronous code, like if we're trying to fetch an API or whatever that we're trying to do, that will return some promise which will be fulfilled or rejected. So we can write that code over here. So for now, let's just write our set timeout code because that's an easy example of an asynchronous code, right? So let's give it 2000 milliseconds, and inside of it, I'm gonna take a result variable, which is true for now. And if result is true, then we're gonna resolve this promise. That means the promise is fulfilled, and to resolve this, we're gonna use this resolve keyword over here. So I'm gonna say resolve and subscribe to Roadside Coder. But what if the result is false? What if the guy is not subscribed to the Roadside Coder? Then we're gonna simply reject the promise. Then we're gonna say else reject, and we're gonna throw a new error. Why aren't you subscribed to Roadside Coder? Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, let's try to run this. And how do we run this? How do we execute a promise? And I'll show you one good thing that I like about promise. So if we execute the promise, we can say dot then. Then means if the promise is fulfilled, we will get the result in then. And if the promise is not fulfilled, if it fails, then we're gonna get the result in catch. So you see how this promise handles error right out of the box. So and then I'm gonna say res and log res, and inside this error, so I'm gonna say console.error err. So let's see, let's check it out. And since as you already know, this is an asynchronous operation, then this will first run the synchronous code and then the asynchronous code over here. So start, stop, and then subscribe to Roadside Coder. Great, but what if our result was false? Then we will get an error over here. Why aren't you subscribed to Roadside Coder? So this is a very basic example of a promise. So now you might be able to figure out how that child mother example connects to this question over here. Now also you might be thinking that we're using this then and catch over here, but what if we were supposed to console log this over here? So if let's console log this. So we get start, and then we get a promise object over here which shows that promise is still pending and it has not resolved yet, but it will be resolved after 2 seconds. So if I refresh this, see it's pending, and then it will be resolved to fulfilled, and this will give us our value which is going to be subscribed to Roadside Coder. Yep, you can see just like that we get fulfilled and the message over here. So that is why we use then and catch over here, which helps us get the result or the error from this. Now let's say if we were supposed to, resolve this promise directly without needing to have all of these conditions and all, right? So let me just take, what we can do directly is we can just say promise dot resolve, and inside of this I'm gonna give this message. So this will work exactly the same. This will return us a new promise with this fulfilled state. So if I just directly print this, you're going to see that we get a promise object, but this will be by default fulfilled and subscribed to Roadside Coder. And let's see if this is an asynchronous operation or not. So if I go on and say dot then, oh, not on this one. Let's take this inside of variable. Let's see. So yeah, you see, it is still an asynchronous operation. We will instantly see the state of the promise at that particular moment which was fulfilled, but we won't see the result until the whole synchronous code has been executed, and after that we will execute our asynchronous code. And similarly we can do reject as well. Yep, you see rejected, and we will get the, oops, we haven't added the dot catch over here. So if you were supposed to dot catch, so catch, and now if we go to our browser, yep, you're gonna see that we have a rejected promise over here, and then it goes to the dot catch block. Okay, so now let's get back to our previous code that we had written. Let me bring that back, this one right over here, and let's implement this with Promise. Let's see how Promise makes this code a bit cleaner. So what I will do is, first of all, I'll remove this thing, and for these functions I'm gonna make a little bit change in this. First of all, I'll remove all of these callbacks, and instead of this I'm gonna say return new promise. And as you know, this takes two things: resolve and reject. Now let's take this and put this inside of this, and instead of doing this callback, I'm gonna say resolve over here, and that's all. We can also add a reject condition if you would like, but let's just focus on resolve for now. And I'm gonna rewrite these two as well, just like that. So we are returning promise over here as well and resolving it. Cool. Now let's see how we can call these. So first of all, for this one, let's make this 1 second as well. So I'm going to say important action, and so we're supposed to provide this a value. So what are we supposed to do after it? If it's resolved, then we're going to say dot then, and if it's not resolved, if it's error, then, or if it's rejected, then we're going to say catch. Cool, just like that. Oh, not see error, response, and error will be over here. Here I'm going to simply do response. So now if we go on and see, we'll get subscribe to roadside code. We're gonna get this start, this stop, and then the asynchronous code. That is this code right over here. Now if you're supposed to execute this like the video function, we're gonna have to follow the same approach that we were following in callbacks. So after this is resolved, we can do this like the video and just give the video name, and then I'm gonna say dot then result. And after this, for share the video as well, let's again share the video. So you see, now it's much more cleaner approach. We are not supposed to pass callbacks to these function as an arguments. We can just do dot then, and then after that we can pass another action. And then we also have this error handling right over here. Let's see. Yep, you see, one after the other, this will be executed sequentially. But then you're gonna tell me that, but this is again that pyramid like structure, right? Then why are we using promises in the first place if we are again supposed to deal with this pyramid like structure? Don't worry, we have more than one approach to do this in promises, one of which is promises chaining. So let me remove this code for now, just keep it like this. I'm gonna remove this catch block for now. So you see what's happening over here is we're calling this promise and then we're resolving it, right? Now after that, what we can do is we can say like the video, and we can provide it the param. To avoid having that pyramid like structure, what we can do is we can return whatever the result of this function is. So we can say return, and we are returning a new promise over here. So then what we can do is we can chain another then after it, not after this function, because if we did that, this was gonna create that pyramid like structure, right? So that's why we are returning it over here, and then we are chaining another dot then. So now if we response, and let's take the response over here, and now let's see. Yep, we get the output, and simply we're gonna return another promise over here like that, and we're gonna have again a dot then like that, and console log response, and after that I'm gonna put a catch block just in case if we get any error like that. So you see, this code is much cleaner than our previous approach. So if we save this and see start stop, and we get all of the message one after the other. So this concept right over here, this is called promises chaining. So why are we calling this promises chaining? Because we are chaining these promises. We are returning a promise, and then we are chaining another promise one after the other as we return the value for the previous promise. So that is why this concept over here is called promise chaining. This can be asked in your interviews as a standalone question, so you should be prepared for this. Or interviewer can ask you output based question on this as well, which obviously we're going to discuss later in this video. We're going to discuss interview questions for all of these concepts that we are understanding over here. So now you might be thinking that this is also a pretty lengthy way of doing it, isn't it? So that's why we have one more approach in Promise, which is called Promise Combinator, which will make our work super easy. So let me show you. So I'm going to remove all of this. You know what? I'll just remove, I'm going to keep this. And I'm going to keep this, all of our promises. And I'm going to remove everything. Print this out for now. Now, so we have something called promise combinators. So what are promise combinators? So promise combinators basically helps us to execute more than one promise at one time and then return the result accordingly. So there are 4 types of promise combinator. One is Promise.all. So what Promise.all helps us to do is, so let's say if we have provided multiple promises to Promises.all, it's gonna run all of the promises in parallel. And in the end, it's going to return the array with all of the fulfilled promises. But let's say if any one of the promise failed, then it's going to fail the complete promise.all. So that is how promise.all works. So let's see this in practical. So I'm going to say promise.all. And this takes an array of all of the promises. So let's copy this up and paste it inside of it, and instead of semicolons, I'm going to provide it just like that. Cool. So now this basically will return us a promise with all of the fulfilled promises inside of an array. So let's, you know what, let's just console log this first. Let's see what we get. So we see we have a pending promise over here and we got it fulfilled with 3 items inside of this array. All of our promises have been resolved over here. Awesome. So let's, what I'm going to do is .then the log result, and also catch for handling our errors like that. Yep, so you see we have this result inside of this array that was returned to us in this .then block. But as I mentioned, if any one of these promises fails, all of these will fail. So I'm gonna say reject, and you know what, I'm not gonna give error over here. Let's just give a custom error message over here. Error promises failed, and now I'm gonna give which promise failed. Yep. So let's see. Yep, you see start, stop, and promises failed, and this gives us this like the JavaScript video promise failed. But you shouldn't fail to like this video, so hit that thumbs up button right now. So this won't go into this .then block even if all of the promises succeed, because if even one of the promises fail, this is going to fail. Now the next promise combinator is Promise.race. So how Promise.race works is, its syntax is exactly like Promise.all, but this returns the first promise that gets fulfilled or rejected. So let me show you. Race. So if any one of these promises succeeds, so I'm guessing this one will succeed first, so this will return it over here. So let's see. Yep, you see. But let's say if this promise was supposed to, get fulfilled first, I'm gonna give 500 to this. Obviously this will make it resolved earlier. So yep, you see. But let's say if this was resolved first, so this is reject. So I'm gonna give this 100 milliseconds. So yep, you see, we only get that promise that gets rejected or resolved first. So that is how Promise.race works. And again guys, I'm gonna teach you how you can create all of these promise combinators from absolute scratch, because that is also a very important interview question as we go forward in this video. So don't you dare click that back button. Now the next promise combinator is Promise.all.settled, which again has the same syntax, but the functionality is a little bit different. So this actually works exactly like Promise.all, but even if any one of the promises fails, it's gonna return all of the promises that are fulfilled as well. So in Promise.all, if any one of the promises fail, it's gonna fail the complete Promise.all, right? But in this one, if any one of the promises fails, for example, let's say this like the video fails. So let me show you. If I go, it's gonna return all of the array items. So this first one was fulfilled, second one was rejected, third one was fulfilled. So that is how all settled works. It works exactly like Promise.all, but it's gonna return the failed promises as well as fulfilled promises. Now the fourth and the last one is Promise.any. Now this is exactly like Promise.race. But what it does is it only returns the first fulfill promise and ignores all the rejected ones. So if let's say this like the video was supposed to be completed first, so yeah, 100 millisecond, but this is going to ignore this one and it's going to move on to the next promise that will get fulfilled. That is this one. So let me show you. Yep, you see, share the JavaScript interview video. But what if all of the promises fail? So let me reject. Only then this will give that okay, all promises were rejected. So just keep all of these points in your mind. We're going to need all of these points when we go on to create their custom implementation or polyfill for all of these. So awesome. These were 4 promise combinators, and these are really important for our interviews because interviewer asks these questions very, very often to try to understand your JavaScript core, JavaScript knowledge. Now let's move towards more modern approach of handling promises, that is with async await. So let me remove all of this code right over here. So let me show you how async await works and helps us. So this is one of the best approaches when we want the promises to be executed one after the other. So first of all, let me fix this. So okay, so let me create a function over here, const result. I'm going to keep it an arrow function. You can keep it a normal function, doesn't really matter. And now inside of this, I'm going to say const message1, and I'm going to call our promise over here, important action, just like that. So this promise will be executed over here, but we're not going to use .then to get the result, right? But if we wrote it like this, this is going to return us the promise object, which we don't want. We want the result from this, right? So what we're going to say is we're going to say await. So what await is going to do is it's going to wait until this promise returns us a fulfilled or rejected or whatever state, and then we're going to get the value and provide it to this message variable. And since we are using await over here, this function is supposed to be an asynchronous function, which we can do it by adding async keyword over here. In a normal function, you can do this function and the name of the function, whatever it is, and just like that. So let me remove that. So yep, this is how you write it with async await. So let me call both of those functions as well. Yep. So what this will do is it's gonna wait for this to finish, then it's gonna move on to this one, and then it's gonna move on to this one. And now if I simply console log this with all of these 3 message 1, then this will give us the proper output. So start, stop, it's waiting for them to get oops, my bad, I didn't call this function. Yeah, now let's see, start, stop, and then yep, we get all of these 3 promises resolved over here. But let's fail any one of these promise. So reject. Now let's see. Okay, it's gonna give us the error like the JavaScript interview questions video. So but we haven't handled this error properly. So how do we handle an error over here when we are not using then and catch? So we're gonna use something called try catch. So we are supposed to write our code inside this try block, and if this try block fails, then it's gonna go inside this catch to show the error. So promises failed, and I'm gonna say error over here. Okay, let's see now. Yep, you see promises failed, and it gives us the message which promise failed, the rejected message. So yeah, I feel like this is one of the most cleanest way of resolving promises with async await, and also promise combinators works like a charm as well. Now if you want all of these messages to be executed instantly after this promise is executed, you can just simply provide console log over here. So this is very flexible to work with. Just one after the other, you can provide all of your output, so that you don't have to wait for all of these promises to fail. So yeah, we get the first output, and this failed over here, so that's why it jumped out of it over here, and then it went inside this catch block. So alright, that's all the theory part that we needed to discuss for this video. Now let's move on to the most asked JavaScript interview questions on callback, promises, async await, etc. But before moving forward, if you are preparing for front-end interviews and you would like me to help you in your front-end interview preparation, you can book a call with me by clicking the link in the description and choose the slot which suits you the best. We're going to discuss all of the last minute preparation tips. I'm going to guide you throughout how you can prepare for your front-end interviews, all of the tips, tricks, and all of the most asked questions. And I'm going to provide you a lot of resources that you can use to prepare for your front-end interviews. So just click the link down in the description below and book a slot with me. Okay, so now let's move on to the most asked interview questions on promises. So here's the first question over here, and we have to tell what is the output for this question. Okay, so we have this console log start, then we have this promise initialization where we say new promise, and then we have a console log inside it, and then we are resolving this promise by 2. Okay, cool. And then what we're doing is we are calling this promise by .then. And then there is this end. So actually I want you to pause this video right now and try this question yourself first before moving on, and then continue with the video to see if your answer matches with mine. So I hope you were able to do this question. Let's see the solution for this. So most people, when they see a question like this, they will think, okay, this will print start, then it will initialize this promise. That means it will print console log 1, and then this is resolving the promise. So we are going to resolve the promise over here and then print 2 and then the end. So that's right. Let's see. No, this will print start 1 and 2. So few people think that we will print start first, then maybe because this is an asynchronous code, this will print start and then 1 and 2, because obviously this is asynchronous code, right? But no, that's not the case. When this promise is initialized, it's gonna find whatever synchronous code is inside of this. So if you remember, JavaScript engine always execute synchronous code first and then the asynchronous code. So this is the synchronous code, and when this is encountering this promise, when this promise is being created, this is the synchronous code. So this will print console log, okay, fine. And then after this, so this is resolving over here, but this will not instantly print it, right? This will only be printed when we do this .then, which is an asynchronous operation. And then we will print end, and then at the last, this will be executed inside of .then, because promise is an asynchronous operation, and asynchronous operation always runs after synchronous operation is finished. So therefore, we will have this output start 1 and 2. So here's another question, which is also what's the output question. So if you were not able to do our previous question, so this is exactly same as the previous one. The only difference is we have a console log 3 over here. So what do you think is going to be the output? We're gonna print first start, and then it will create a new promise inside of which it will encounter this synchronous code. So that's when we will print console log 1, then resolve 2. And a lot of people think that, okay, maybe since this is an asynchronous operation, this will also be printed at the very last. So that means start 1 and then 2, 3. But that's not the case. We are going to print start, then 1, then 3, then end, and then the asynchronous operation, that is resolve, that is this one at the very last. So this is the only thing that is asynchronous over here, because these two are synchronous and can be instantly executed while we are initializing our new promise. So let's see. Yep, start 1, 3 and 2. Awesome. Now before moving to our next question, I'd like to tell you that there can be another variation of these questions where interviewer can confuse you by removing this resolve altogether. Then what will you think that the output will be? And let's say he puts result. So you may think that this will print, okay, start 1, 3 and then end, and then after that result, and there is no result, right? So it will be undefined. But that's not the case. Since there is no resolve, it will not go inside of this .then block. So if you see, start 1, 3 and end. So don't confuse this when the interviewer does not give you a resolve inside of a promise. This will not go inside of this .then at all. Now here's another output based question. So in this, the interviewer has added this fn function to confuse us. So this has this start and then this fn function. Then we have this console log middle, then this fn function is being called, and then we have the end. So this function is there to confuse you. So many people will think that, okay, we'll print start and then we'll print console log and then middle, and then this is obviously an asynchronous operation, so we will print end, and then after that we will print success over here, right? But don't miss this part, that function is being called after this middle. So we'll print start, then middle, and then this function will be called. So this console log 1 will be printed when this new promise is initialized. And then after that we'll print end, and then we will print success. So now if we see, yep. So these are pretty easy output based questions, right? But don't worry, this is just the beginner level. I'm gonna increase the difficulty of these questions as we move along, and you have to try them along with me. Alright, pause. If you're not yet following me on Twitter, go to twitter.com/Piyush_Eon or click the link in the description down below and hit that follow button right now. I'm waiting for you. I'm still waiting. Okay, fine. Let's continue with the video. So here's our fourth output based question, and this is actually on promise chaining. So we have a function over here which returns a new promise, inside of which we have this reject function over here. Okay, and after that we are calling this job function and we are assigning it to this promise variable. Okay, fine. So this will return a new promise inside of this job function that is inside of this promise variable. So then we have this promise which we are calling, and then we have a bunch of .then and .catch methods. And if you remember, this is what a promise chaining is, right? So let's see what's happening. So this will reject the promise. Okay, so we will have a rejected promise inside of over here. So when we call this, so this will not go inside this .then, not go inside this .then, not go inside this .then, and it will go inside this .catch over here. So this should print error 1, and then it will print success 4 because there is this .then attached to it. So a lot of people who didn't know what promise chaining is, they might get confused with such a syntax and they might not know what to do. But it's simple. We're gonna just do .catch, and whatever the result is, since in this case we are not returning anything, so we're just gonna go inside this .then block and print success 4. Okay, cool. So let's see. Yep, error 1, success 4. Okay, let's try a little bit advanced version of this question. So here it is. So let's take this one by one. This might be a little confusing to few of you. So we have this question over here, job, and inside this we are creating a new promise again and returning it, and we are taking this state as a parameter. And if the state is true, we are resolving success. If the state is false, this will be reject error. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Then after that, we have this variable promise inside of which we are calling this job function. So this job function will return a promise inside of this promise variable. So job will be true. So that means this will return resolve success. Cool. Okay, we have the resolve success inside this promise. So when we go inside this promise, so this will be .then. Obviously, since it's a resolved promise, it will go inside the .then. So I'm gonna say this will print, which is this success over here, right? So it's returning this success. So this will print success first. Okay, fine. Then this is gonna return job false. Okay, so this is calling another promise over here, and then this is returning as we discussed in our promise chaining part, right? So we have this job false over here. Okay, cool. So this will reject the promise and return error. Fine. So this will now return a rejected promise. So this will go inside of the catch. Okay, cool. So we have catch just right after it. So we will go inside of the catch. It will print this error variable which has this error inside of it, since we are rejecting the error, right? So let's print error. Cool. Now after this we are returning error caught. Now since we are returning a string over here, obviously this is not a failed promise, so this will just be counted as a resolved promise. So then this will go inside this .then block and it will print error caught over here. So error caught. And then after that we are returning job true, which will obviously be again returning this resolve success. But after this, if you see, we don't have any .then block. So this will go, so this will not go inside this .catch and the code will end here. So this should be our output. Let's see. Yep, success, error and error caught. Awesome. Alright, so now this is even more advanced version of the previous question. So I want you to do this first. So let me show you the complete question over here. So we have a function job as previously, and we are calling this function over here, and then we are resolving the promises right over here. Let me make the font a bit small so you can see the question and then try it yourself. So just like that. Alright, so I hope you were able to do it. So we have this job function which we are calling over here, job true. Right, so this will return resolve success as previously. Write it over here. Now after this, we are taking this promise variable and then we are chaining a bunch of functions after it, bunch of .then and catch functions after it. So then let's see. So this is resolve success, right? So obviously this will print this thing right over here. Cool. Now after that, we are again saying return job true. So this is again a resolved promise, right? So it will go inside of this .then block over here. And now it's checking if the data is not equal to victory, which obviously it's not equal to victory, it's equal to success. So this will throw defeat. Now this is throwing an error to us. So this will be a rejected promise from now on. So even though this is returning job true, we are going to ignore it because we are saying throw defeat. So this will not go inside this .then block. It will go directly inside this .catch block, which will print error, which was defeat. So I'm gonna print defeat over here. Now moving forward, this is returning job false. So obviously it will return this rejected error. So then it will not go inside this dot then block, it will go directly inside this dot catch block, and it will print this console log error, which is going to be this thing, error. Now this is returning error caught, and even though it's written error caught over here, this is just to confuse you because this is an resolved promise, right? This is not a rejected promise. So this will go inside this dot then. So now inside the dot then, this will print this data over here, which is this error caught. Then we are returning this new error test, which is again just to confuse you. This is not a rejected promise, this is just a normal text. So new error test. So this will go inside this dot then block, and it will print success test. So let's see the output. Yep, we got the exact same output. So this part can be a little tricky that the interviewer put to confuse us, but now you know how to do them. Now here's another question on promise chaining. Actually there's a bit of explanation required, that's why I haven't written the question over here. So what interviewer has asked us to do is he has asked us to create a promise called first promise, which will resolve to a text called first, and then we have to create another promise called second promise, which will resolve our first promise that we had created earlier. Then what we're supposed to do, we will resolve our second promise, and output of which we have to pass to our first promise and then print the first promise. So let me show you what we're supposed to do. So const first promise equals new promise, like that, and inside this we are supposed to resolve it by first. Okay, then we have to create another promise called second promise, and this will resolve this first promise over here. So I'm gonna paste it right over here. So then what we're supposed to do, we are supposed to call the second promise. Okay, second promise dot then result. Okay, so we don't need to console log anything over here because we are supposed to invoke this first promise through this second promise. So we're gonna say result, and we can also say like this, return result. Okay, so this will return result, right? Then we have to pass this, that this has been resolved, and whatever promise that this will return, so this will return this first promise over here, right? So we can do dot then again and result console log result. Now I know it might be a little bit confusing to understand this question at first. I was also confused when I heard this question for the first time. So you have to ask your interviewer a bit more explanation on what he's trying to ask you to do. When we do dot then like this, it will print this first over here. Yep, we got this first. So the only purpose of this question is to understand that you know the concept of promise chaining or not. Okay, so for our next question, the interviewer has given us this code snippet over here, and we have to rewrite this example using async await. So if you remember, I explained what async await is and how it makes our life a bit easier. So let's try to write this code by using async await instead of using dot then and catch. So we have this load JSON function over here with this URL, and we are returning this fetch URL. So what we can do is we can just take a variable called response, and we can say await fetch, and we're gonna give it URL over here, right? Let me comment this out. We're gonna wait for our fetch to finish fetching whatever URL that we have provided this, and get the response inside this response variable over here. Now we're gonna check if response dot status is 200, that is it works. We're gonna have the response inside the JSON, and then we're gonna simply return this JSON. Otherwise we're gonna throw a new error over here. And oops, I forgot to add async over here. Yep. So you see how clean this code looks now. Earlier it was having dot then and all those chaining and stuff, right? Now it's much more cleaner that if response is 200, return this. Otherwise it's gonna throw a new error. So this is a much cleaner syntax, and this is a very basic example. Let's move forward. Okay, so for this next question, the interviewer has asked me to create a function called prom_recurs, which takes promises in form of an array and resolves them recursively. So this function is going to use recursion to resolve all of the promises. So let's say we have a bunch of promises. Let's take our previous example of all of these promises. Important action, like the video, share the video, all of that. Let me minimize them for now. So we have these three promises, right? How can we pass them to this function so that they can be resolved recursively? So we're going to call them just like this way. So we have to write the implementation over here. Let's see what we can do. So first and foremost, we have to check all of the edge cases, right? So one of the edge cases is if the function that are provided to us, we have to check if they are equal to 0, that are we even provided any functions or not. If this is empty, then obviously we are not going to do anything, right? So if this equals to 0, we're going to say return. That's all. Right. After that is being after that's handled, what we're going to do, we're going to say const, let's say current promise, and I'm going to assign one promise to this. So function.promises.shift. Now if you don't know what shift does, let me show you. So if we have an array called 1 2 3 and let's assign it, I don't know, let's a temp variable, right? So if we say temp dot shift and then we call this, we're gonna get 1 and this will be modified and this won't have 2 and 3 anymore. So now if we print temp, yep, you see, so it removed 1 from it and now it has 2 and 3 from. Let's continue. So now we will have the very first promise, that is this important action promise inside of this current promise, right? Now we can say current promise and we can resolve this right over here. So and console.log result, and if there's an error, I'm gonna say dot catch and handle that error right over here. Awesome. So we have taken this promise and resolved it over here. Yeah, that's pretty simple. But what about the result remaining promises, right, that are inside of this variable over here? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna call this function again recursively. So we're just gonna pass remaining promises to this. So in the next iteration, what's gonna happen is it's gonna have these two functions, then it's gonna resolve this one, then the third iteration it's gonna have this function, so it's gonna resolve this, and then again it's gonna pass it to this function, and then in the last iteration it's gonna encounter this function equals to 0, then it's gonna return simply, and then our implementation will end. So let's see, we have the subscribe, like the video and share the video. All of our promises have been resolved recursively. So this is how you can do this implementation. Okay, so now finally the time has come that you all have been waiting for. We are going to create the polyfill for our promise. Yes, we are going to create our own promise, inside of which we can use .then, .resolve, we can use promise.resolve, promise.catch, and all the functions that are available to a normal promise. So we have this function called promise polyfill, and it's going to take a executor. So executor, if you remember what an executor is. So let me write a basic example for a promise which we're going to run later. So example promise, and we have new, instead of writing promise, now we're gonna write promise polyfill, and this is going to take resolve and reject. So this is what our executor is, and inside of this I'm gonna simply return set timeout. I'm gonna simulate a promise over here, right? Simple. And then simply we can take this example promise and say .then, and it's gonna be resolved over here inside this console log. Also this can have a .catch as well. We're going to test all of these things out when we have created our polyfill. So let me comment this out for now, and let's start implementing our promise polyfill. Now let's see what are all the things that are required to create a promise polyfill. First of all, that we have discussed that it needs to take this function with this resolve reject, so which will be called as executor, right? Then after that, when we call this promise, this should have this .then and .catch functions after it, which we can chain after it. So what we're gonna do for now, I'm gonna have, let's say, this .then, which will be obviously chained after the promise when it's being resolved. So I'm gonna say this .then, it will be a function, anonymous function, which will take a callback. Because obviously when we do .then, we have a callback inside of it, right? Which we're going to use now. And we're going to have a variable over here, let on resolve. And when this is resolved, I'm going to say on resolve equals callback. And then simply we're going to return our this, that is our promise polyfill class. Cool. Oops, I mean return. Yeah. And similarly, we're gonna have a catch as well. So, oops, this .catch, and this will be another anonymous function. This will take a callback, and this is going to return this as well. Don't worry, I'm gonna write all the complete implementation for this in just a minute. I'm just trying to create a simplified version of the same thing. Now apart from this, we are providing this executor to this promise polyfill, right? So we are supposed to provide this executor with this resolve and reject. So over here we will have this executor which will have resolve and reject. So we will have two functions as such. First function will be resolve, which will have a value which we will provide while resolving it, like this. Now when this is resolved, so I'm going to say on resolve value, and similarly we're going to have a reject as well, like that. And actually we're going to have an on reject variable as well. So here we're going to say on reject. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything as we go forward, just bear with me for now. And this function will be called reject, right? So this is a very basic things that I'm trying to cover for now, so that we have a structure to work with. And you know what, inside of this dot catch as well, I'm going to write on reject equals callback, and we're going to write the further implementation later. Now you know what, let's test this out. Obviously the dot catch will not work because this will require much more than what we have written up until now. So let me just remove the comment and let's see what do we get up until now. Yep, we get this 2 over here. So we are creating this new instance of this promise polyfill right over here, and then we are having this executor function over here, right, with resolve and reject. Okay, fine. Now after this we are calling this dot then. Now dot then will have this callback which will take this response and console log this response. Okay, so when we go inside this dot then, we have this callback and we are assigning this callback to the on resolve variable. So now the on resolve variable is a function which will take this response over here. So we are returning this. So we have returned this instance of this promise.polyfill. Now we can access all of these functions inside of this promise polyfill, right? So now if we go inside of over here, we have this resolve 2. So this will call resolve over here. And now if you remember, resolve was a callback. So this will be provided this 2 variable over here. Now inside this on resolve, we are providing this 2 variable. Cool. And then we are calling this on resolve. So therefore we are printing this console.log resolve. So this is a very basic implementation of this thing. Now let's move forward. So what we have done up until this point is for the asynchronous operations, right? When we do this dot then, but let's say if we don't have this set timeout, or we are not calling an API and we are just directly resolving this, then what's going to happen? It's not going to go inside this dot then. So it will not provide this callback to this on resolve. So this will give us this error that on resolve is not a function, because obviously inside of this resolve over here, on resolve is not a function anymore. It's just a variable because we haven't initialized it with a function. So let's handle the synchronous part of this thing as well. Now before that, I'm gonna take a few more variables over here. First one will be is fulfilled, just to show if this been fulfilled or not, and by default it will obviously be false. And we're gonna have another one which is called, and we are gonna have a value, just like that. And I'm going to tell you what value will be used for later. So first of all, whenever this resolve is called, I'm going to say is fulfilled is going to be true, because obviously whenever this resolved is called, our promise will be fulfilled, right? So offset is fulfilled to be true, and we're going to use this is fulfilled later on. And then the value will be equals to value, or let's call it val, this one as well, to avoid any confusions later on. Cool. And also, if you can recall, in synchronous operation, this will not be a function anymore, right? So we're going to check first if resolve on resolve, type of on resolve, actually type of on resolve is equals to a function. If this is equals to a function, then only we're going to call this on resolve over here, and we're going to set that this is been called, that is called to true. We're going to set that this resolve and this function that is on resolved has been called. We are putting this is called for checking this on resolve function, which is indicating that this callback right over here has been called. So now next, if we try to run this with this synchronous code, obviously we're not going to get any error. Cool. So we have resolved this error for now, but we haven't yet executed our on resolve function over here, right? In the case of a synchronous operation, then what are we going to do? So in this case, we're gonna, since this is not going to be a asynchronous operation, the dot then will be called later on. So then we're gonna go inside this then block, and I'm gonna say if it's been fulfilled, that if the resolve is called, and if it's been not called, that is it has not gone inside of this, and this is an synchronous operation. So I'm gonna say if, where did it go? Yeah, is fulfilled and not is called, right? Then what we're gonna do, we're gonna say called equals true. In this case, we are putting the called equals true over here so that we know that this is an synchronous operation, and then we're gonna put the called equals to true, and then we're gonna say on resolve, because now right now this has been initialized with this callback, right? Don't worry, I'm gonna explain all of this stuff once again. If you are unable to understand, don't worry, just bear with me for a minute. I'm gonna explain you all of this. And if you remember, we had initialized our value with this val, so now we can use that value over here just like this. And I think that's all. Let's see. Yep, we see we get this returned value over here. And if we uncomment this out now, it's gonna work for synchronous, I mean asynchronous as well. So it's working for synchronous and asynchronous as well, both of them. Cool. So this was the completion of our resolve and dot then code. Let's complete our dot catch code similarly, dot catch and this reject function. So in the same manner, we're gonna have this is rejected as well, similar to is fulfilled. So if we go inside this reject, we're gonna write is rejected to true, and value equals to val as previous. And again, we're gonna check just like this. So this will be on reject. If this is a function, then only we're gonna call this. So I'm gonna put it inside of here, and we're gonna say called. In this case as well, we're gonna have the same variable, because obviously this can be called only once, either in then or in catch. So called will be true, and our this dot catch as well, we're gonna check like this. If it's fulfilled, and if it's not called, then it's called equals true, and on reject will be a value. So I'm gonna add this code right over here just like this, and this should work for the rejected promises as well. Now if I, let's say reject, see, okay, this is working for asynchronous. Let's try for the synchronous as well. Yep, it works absolutely the same. Awesome. And also we are supposed to handle the errors over here as well. We have to do error handling before the executor. So I'm gonna say try catch. If everything goes well, we're gonna execute this executor, but if anything goes wrong, we're gonna say reject. Yeah, that works fine, I guess. This looks good. And that is all. That was the implementation for a promise polyfill. So let's go through it once more. Okay, so we have this promise over here. We are creating the new instance of this promise polyfill with this callback with resolve and reject. I'm gonna go for resolve first. I'm gonna explain all the conditions, right? Because obviously the reject condition is exactly the same as resolve. So I'm gonna explain you just the resolve condition over here. So what we're doing is we have this executor function over here, which we are passing to this promise polyfill. And after that, we are calling this example polyfill by using dot then and dot catch. So what it's going to do, it's going to create a new instance for this promise polyfill with this executor. And now inside this, we are calling this with dot then. Now I'm talking about asynchronous operation over here. So in the asynchronous operation, this dot then will be called first. So inside this dot then, we're gonna assign this callback. What's the callback? This one right over here. This is the callback which will be assigned to this on reject over here. Right, now it's gonna check if it's fulfilled or if it's not called. So is it been fulfilled? No, it's not been fulfilled up until now. And is it called? No, it's not called either. So it's not gonna go inside of it, and just simply gonna return this. Now when we return this, we're gonna go inside this executor. Also, we are calling this executor right over here with resolve and reject, so that we can run this function, which is this. So we're gonna call this resolve over here, and inside this resolve, we're gonna say is fulfilled to true and value equals val. And then I'm gonna check if it's a function. Yes, it's a function. So I'm gonna call on resolve to val. And when it's called with this value, it's gonna go inside this response, and we're gonna print 2. Simple as that. So this was for asynchronous operations. But for synchronous operations, when this doesn't exist, what it's gonna simply do is it's gonna call this resolve first. So it's called this resolve first. It's gonna put this is fulfilled to true, value equals val, and right now this is not a function because we have not called dot then yet. So we're not gonna go inside of it, and then we're gonna come to dot then over here. where we will put this callback on resolve, and then we will check, is it fulfilled? Yes, it's been fulfilled. And is it called? No, it's not been called. So I'm gonna put call equals to true, and we're gonna call on resolve, which will in turn, what it will do is, which it will print 2 over here. Simple. So that was our promise implementation. Now, if you want to implement this, promise.resolve, which we discussed at the start of this video, what we can simply do is, it's very easy. I'm just gonna bring in the code over here. You can take your promise.polyfill and say dot resolve. We're gonna assign a key to our promise polyfill, which will return a function with a new promise inside of it, and this we are returning a promise inside of it. Since we haven't put this curly braces, if we put this curly braces, we have to write like return new promise, and this will directly call this value. So we are directly resolving this value. And if we duplicate this, we can do simply for reject as well. So reject and reject, just like that. This is pretty easy. So yeah, this was our promise polyfill, and this is a really important question when it comes to intermediate and senior developer level interviews. In junior interviews, it's rarely asked, but I feel like you should know this. Alright, so for our next question, the interviewer has given us to create the polyfill for Promise.all. So if you don't remember what Promise.all did was, let me tell you a bit example over here. Let's say we have those original promises over here, all of these 3 promises, and if we need to resolve this, what we needed to do, Promise.all, and we're gonna call this inside of this array over here, just like this, and I'm gonna say .then log result, and you see we have all of these 3 promises resolved over here. So what we simply need to do, instead of this promise.all, we need to create an implementation called all polyfill, and we need to call this right over here, and this should work as expected. Obviously right now it won't work since we haven't created our implementation. So let's go on. I'm going to comment this out for now. Right, so first step will be to return a new promise. Only then you'll be able to do this .then and .catch. So return new promise. And you know what, you can also use our promise implementation that we have created and add this all polyfill to that one as well. That's gonna work in the exact same way. Anyways, I'm gonna use the promise for now. So I'm gonna have the executor resolve reject. Cool. So we're gonna return a new promise. That's the basic thing that we need to do. Now, if you remember, our output was in the form of an array, and also our input was also in the form of array. So this promises will be this array of promises. So for our output, I'm going to take a new variable, const result equals an empty array. Cool. Now I'm going to say if promise dot length. Now if this doesn't have any length, that is, this is an empty array, then we're going to simply resolve it with the result, or let's say results, right? And then I'm going to return it. Simple, because obviously we don't need to do anything if this promises are empty, if this is an empty array, right? Now after that, we need to know what's the length of all of these promises is. So I'm going to have another variable. I'm going to call this pending promises dot length, and I'll tell you in just a second why we are doing this. And now after this, we're going to go through each of the promises and resolve them one by one. So I'm going to say promises dot for each, and I'm going to take 2 things. First, the promise and the index. Now as we encounter each promise, we're going to resolve it one by one. So I'm going to say promise dot resolve, this promise dot resolve, and I'm going to provide this promise over here, and we're going to say dot then. And now some people will say that there are some other ways to do this in polyfill as well. Yes, you're right, there are many ways to do this polyfill as well, and I'm going to include all of those ways in the blog that I've written on this topic, on this promise interview questions topic. So you can find that blog by clicking the link in the description down below. But let's understand this current implementation for now. So I'm going to say dot then and result. I'm going to say results variable, which was right over here, and I'm going to add this result to this results variable. So index equals result. And now I'm gonna move this pending. So this pending was on the top of this current length, right? Let's say currently its length was 3. So now I'm gonna move to another promise. So I'm gonna say pending minus minus. But let's say if we have executed all of the promises and this is finished, and all of these promises are finished and pending is now at 0. So I'm going to check if pending is equals to 0. Then we're going to resolve our complete promise by saying resolve and providing this results variable to this. Cool. And apart from this, if there's any error whatsoever in this implementation, I'm going to say comma reject. Simple. And I guess this should be good enough for us. Let's try this out. I'm gonna uncomment this out and let's see. Assignment to constant variable. Oh, okay. I'm gonna put this let, not const, obviously, because we are doing minus minus over here. Yeah, there we go. We have this result for our promise.all implementation. And you know what? I'm gonna fail any one of the promise, because obviously if any one of the promise fails, all of them should fail, right? So reject. And you see all of them have failed over here, but we haven't handled the dot catch part. Error and console dot error. And I'm gonna say failed, like that. Let's see. Yep, failed, and whatever the message that we had provided over in that promise. Awesome. So yeah, that is what we were expecting from this, and this is what the Promise.all implementation is. And trust me, this is one of the most asked question when it comes to promises. In all juniors, seniors, any type of interview, it is asked a lot in this interview. I cannot stress on this fact on how important this question really is. So cool, that was Promise.all implementation. Also, I'm not going to discuss Promise.race, Promise.all.settled and Promise.any in this video because they're not that frequently asked, but their implementation is kind of similar and is simpler when we compare it to Promise.all. So that's why I've included the code and explanation for all of that in my blog, link for which you can find in the description down below. But still, if you want me to make another video on just the promise polyfills, let me know. I'll create another video in which I'll include promise implementation, promise all, race, all settled and any. Completely different video for that. But if it's good enough, then yeah, cool. So yeah, that was all for this video. And again, if you're preparing for a front-end interview, you can book a call with me one-on-one where we can discuss all of the tips, tricks, and I'm gonna guide you on how you can effectively prepare for your front-end interviews and ace them. So like this video if you found this video helpful, and subscribe to the channel for more such awesome JavaScript interview videos.